Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkansas Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about some scary places I've found on the internet and in books I own. You ghost hunter fans will be happy to know that Jason Hawes, Steve Gonsalves, and Dave Tango are coming back to a TV near you. The new show may be called Ghost Nation. That's what they call a working title. And you'll be able to see it on the Travel Channel. It's kind of funny how the Travel Channel is quickly becoming the Paranormal Channel. They have more shows on strange occurrences and strange things than they have on traveling around the country, which I kind of like. I was just at the coffee shop, and a friend of mine told me about her weird encounter. Her and her boyfriend were driving on Mines Road heading east. They were about 2 blocks from the bridge that goes over the railroad tracks. There was a strange-looking thing in the median of the road. It looked to be light gray, and it was crouched down on all fours, kind of like a dog or a wolf. As they drew alongside this creature, it suddenly dove right at them. The thing hit the side of the car with a loud thump, so the boyfriend began to slow down so he could have a look and see what he'd hit. Well, she said don't stop, thinking the thing might be dangerous. They continued on to the coffee shop where she worked. Once there, the boyfriend got out to examine the side of his car, see if there was any damage. There was no dent or any scratches. However, the dirt had been rubbed away from the side panel right where the thing had hit. Knowing the area where this happened, I asked if the thing might have looked like the rake that I had seen back in May or June of 2013. My sighting had taken place less than a mile from where they had seen the dog or the wolf creature. It was on the same set of railroad tracks. I'd seen the thing under the railroad bridge where it crossed I-35, and they'd seen it where it paralleled Mines Road. Monadas Creek Lake is in that area, and then there are warehouses and brush. Back in the bad old days, chemical companies would dump all kinds of nasty goo into Monadas Creek. In January 2000, Dr. Earhart of the Rio Grande International Study Center spoke before the Texas State Senate Special Committee on Border Affairs. He reported that in 1997, the Texas Natural Resources Conservation Committee study led to the conclusion that pollutants from a warehouse district in northwest Laredo were making their way into the river, especially by way of Monadas Creek. Dr. Earhart reported that these toxic chemicals are coming primarily from Laredo, saying that unregulated warehouses built along the banks of creeks that fed into the Rio Grande are the principal threat to water quality. I know this sounds a bit like the plot to a B-movie. Someone or something drinks polluted water and turns into a wolf man or a dog man or some other creepy-crawly thing. Then there was the report of a similar creature seen near Texas A&M International on Loop 20. It's not all that far from the first two sightings to the college, but there are houses all along the routes where any kind of a creature would have been seen by several people. The only explanation that might link these sightings is if the creature people are seeing is moving from place to place by means of maybe trans-dimensional travel. This would explain a lot of sightings that people have in areas where bizarre creatures really shouldn't be seen. Now, I know it's not a good idea to use one bizarre theory to try to explain away a bizarre event, but then the folks who tell you that these things don't happen don't believe in them anyway. So they're just saying things like this to try to make it sound like they know what they're saying. Can't possibly happen because we can't recreate it in a laboratory. Last year, I did a show called Scary Locations. Mostly I talked about Civil War battlefields that retain the horrors of war and death. There are many places all over the world that hold some kind of a force or activity that makes people uneasy to be there, if not downright afraid. I've already talked about my encounters, so I'll give you some I found from other folks who went to places they wished they had avoided. I found many of these sightings and events on the internet. Some I found in books I own. I think I own way too many books. But then, you can never have too many books. They're kind of like cats. They just kind of start piling up. You just have to love the name of this road. Shades of Death Road. Or sometimes it's just called the Shades. This is a 2-lane rural road that runs about 7 miles in central Warren County, New Jersey. I have a hard time saying New Jersey. I almost always use the stereotypical accent and it comes out New Jersey. This road runs in a north-south direction through Liberty and Independence townships. It then turns more of an east-west to Alamuchee Township. This town is north of the Interstate 80. The south of this section of road runs along Jenny Jump State Forest. Now, with a name like that, Jenny Jump, I just had to look this up. It is supposed to be named after an incident that took place back in 1748. A Swiss family had built a farm on land that once had been occupied by the local Indians. Well, the Indians kind of took offense and they attacked the homestead. Jenny, the 9-year-old daughter, ran out the door and she came to a cliff face where she was afraid to continue. Her father yelled up to her, "Jenny, jump!" And unfortunately, that's the end of the story. They don't say whether or not she jumped, or didn't jump, or whether she lived or died. Now there's a mountain and a theme park named after this 9-year-old who may have jumped from a cliff, or maybe not. The whole story could have just been made up. But then, if it's made up, why is it called Jenny Jump? There's a theme park there that is called the Land of Make-Believe. So, I don't give this story quite as much credit as I should. According to Mark Sherman and Mark Moran, the creators of Weird New Jersey and the Weird Book series, A Shades of Death Road has become such a tourist attraction, the folks living there wish they were someplace else. The street signs are considered to be collector's items, and kids and sometimes adults will try to steal the signs. In an effort to keep the signs in place, The locals will grease up the posts so that nobody can climb them. This would never work in Texas, since just about everyone here drives a pickup, and we just pull up next to the signpost and then remove it. Ah, the advantages of owning a pickup. Shades of Death's southern end is at County Route 611, or Hope Road, in Liberty Township. The road runs back and forth through some thick wooded areas, but it also has rural housing. The north end of Shades of Death Road is the junction with Long Bridge Road. The southern half of the road is mostly wooded and is the location used by highwaymen who used to wait for travelers to come by so they could rob them. Sometimes in the course of the robbery, the bandits would kill their victims. These highwaymen or robbers would get into altercations with each other, and sometimes fights to the death would occur. When the folks living in and around the area grew tired of losing family members and business to these lawbreakers, they banded together. They searched down all the robbers. Not wanting to wait for the authorities, the locals took matters into their own hands. The trees along Shades of Death Road were filled with the corpses of the robbers. This was done as a warning to any robbers who might want to try to move in now that the local menace had been dealt with. The name vigilantes has received a bad name over the years. In the beginning, the name meant vigilant, which means keeping careful watch for possible danger or difficulties. Keeping an eye on your fellow town folks' property so no one tries to steal it. This stemmed from a time when only the big cities had law enforcement. On occasion, the vigilantes would arrest and execute the wrong person, but then, even today, sometimes the wrong people wind up in jail. The next time you hear somebody saying vigilante justice, just remember, at one time, this was all we had. In the 1920s and 30s, there were 3 brutal murders along the road. One involved a robbery where a man was hit over the head with a tire iron. The robber was interested in the gold coins the victim had in his possession. The blow to the head was fatal. The second murder was a woman who had been beheaded by her husband. He buried that body in one location, and the head was buried in a different place on the other side of the road. Well, the head and the body were found, which led to the husband being arrested and tried for murder. The third murder was of Bill Cummins, who was shot and then buried in a muddy hole. Bill was eventually found, but his murderer was never caught. The road twists and turns as it passes between the trees, and this has been a factor in numerous car accidents. Many of these were fatal, but the name of the road was there long before the automobile was invented. The guardrails along the sharp bends show scrape marks from cars that managed to stay on the road. Should a car hit too hard, the rail would be breached and then replaced after the accident. Bear Swamp is just off the edge of the road. It had originally been known as Cat Hollow or Cat Swamp. This was due to a pack of vicious wildcats that lived around the swamp that would attack travelers along the road. Many of these attacks were fatal. Driving in a car, we feel a lot safer than travelers from back in the day when many would have to travel about on foot. A lone person walking along the tree-shrouded road would be an easy target for a mountain lion or even a bobcat if it was hungry enough. Some people don't take bobcats serious because, well, they're just a giant kitty cat, right? Well, you take a 35-pound cat with claws and teeth and an empty belly, it can be quite a adversary. Any mangled bodies found along the road would be attributed to wild cat attacks. At one time, Bear Swamp was full of mosquitoes that at one time carried malaria. Most folks don't know this, but the tiny, lowly mosquito has killed more people than all the lions and tigers and bears combined. When you hear a mosquito buzzing around your ear, don't worry about it. The male mosquito is the only one that makes noise, and they don't bite. The female mosquito doesn't make any sound. It just flies in and sucks your blood. And then, the initial bite is painless. Your body pumps histamine to the bite to let you know you're being attacked. Histamine is what causes the itching and the swelling. So when you hear the buzzing sound, just relax. It's when you don't hear anything you have to be ready. One story says the road was originally just called the Shades. All those tall trees made this obvious. Being out in the country, medical treatment was scarce at best. When someone came down with malaria, there was a good chance they were doomed. It is guessed that half of everyone that ever lived on this planet died from malaria. The folks living along Shades Road began to refer to it as Shades of Death. In an effort to stop the deaths from malaria, which was discovered in 1880, the state got busy and they drained the swamp in 1884. A second story says the road got its name from all the murders that took place. The ghosts seen on Ghost Lake are the spirits of those whose lives were cut short. Along the Shades of Death Road, you'll find a lake that has no name. The locals call this Ghost Lake. The lake was man-made in the early 1900s by two homeowners that dammed a creek running between their houses. Once the lake was established, people would see wispy shapes dancing across the water's surface. Some said this was just vapor rising from the water, while others said they could see spirits or ghosts. Human shapes moving across the water that were only mostly there. The pass that leads into the area where Ghost Lake is found is called Haunted Hollow. The website, Weird New Jersey, says that visitors have reported no matter what time of night they visit the lake, the sky above it always seems brighter than the surrounding night sky. It looks more like it were twilight than late evening. This coloration is supposed to be due to the ghosts and spirit activity in and around the lake. On the far side of the lake sits an old abandoned cabin that is the location of several murders from the past. To the side of Ghost Lake, there's a small cave that was once used by the Lenape Indians that lived in the area. Archaeologists who investigated the area in 1918 found pottery shards, flint, and broken arrowheads. From their findings, the archaeologists concluded that the cave was seldom visited by the Indians. They said this was more of a stopping-off place while traveling from one camp to another. With its close proximity to several known burial sites, it may have been sacred or religiously important site. The cave became known as the Fairy Hole, but nobody knows why or when. Kids have gone in and spray painted the walls and carved their names into the stone. Lenape Lane is an unpaved, one-lane, dead-end street. It's about 3/4 of a mile that runs east off of Shades of Death, just north of I-80. The little road ends at a farmhouse. It would appear as if this is the driveway for the farm, but halfway along the road is a wide spot for parking or turning around. Next to this wide spot is an old wooden structure that is referred to as the stables. It's been a long time since anybody used this building, and it looks pretty darn creepy. Visitors to the stable who go there at night have reported seeing a local fog that is only near the building. All around it, the ground is clear, but right next to the stables is a thick fog. The folks out there at night say they have seen spectral images moving around in the mist. This sounds way too much like that movie, The Fog. The original one with Jamie Lee Curtis and Adrienne Barbeau. I started to watch the remake and I was like, yeah, why bother? I always prefer the originals, well, almost always. The air around the stables feels a lot colder than the air anywhere else in the area. The witnesses all report being overcome with a feeling of unease or dread. Late-night visitors to the Lenape Road see a white orb that appears near the end of the road, closest to the farmhouse. As they watch, the orb will begin to move towards the visitors. It even seems to chase them away from the farm. Right in the middle of this road stands an old tree that was left standing when the road was built. Legend says if you walk around the tree and then to the end of the road, you'll never be seen again. But I haven't found any reports of people going missing after doing this. Could be just a legend, but then who knows for sure? Thousands of people go missing each year. As you're driving along the road, if you see a deer standing just to the side of the road, this is a sign that you should slow down. If not, you'll wind up having a wreck or very serious car trouble. The deer is supposed to be the spirit of a dead Indian that is there to protect or try to help travelers. Another legend tells of a bridge over Flat Brook River, which is on Old Mine Road, just off Shades of Death Road. Drivers can stop near the bridge just after midnight with their high beams on and then honk your horn 3 times. This will bring 2 ghosts into view. The ghosts are of 2 young children who were killed by a car at that site. I have issues with ghosts of children. A lot of folks get wrapped up in the tragedy of young people dying, and they tend to be very open and emotional. Why would a child's spirit stay on after death? The children don't have the same emotional attachment to this plane of existence as adults. They don't fear death the same as adults because to them it is an abstract idea that they really can't understand, and so they tend to ignore it. When a ghostly image appears in front of people, is it really the spirit of a dead child? Or could it be something else trying to play with our emotions? Remember, the entity that started the whole exorcist story started out as the boy's aunt, and then it turned into a demon. Whenever the Laredo Paranormal Research Society is doing a guest event, we ask anyone who is afraid to step forward, and then we have them go first. This fear tends to bring spirits close because the spirits want to use the emotions being radiated from the first person down the hall. Emotions are a form of energy. It almost guarantees there will be some form of activity. I suspect some, if not all, of these ghost children might be something else entirely. Maybe even an elemental that has learned to mimic a child's image, to be able to absorb the emotions of those who see it. Back in the 90s, some people hiking through the woods next to the Shades of Death Road found about 100 Polaroid photos scattered around the trees. The photos showed what looked like a young woman in some kind of distress. It looked as if someone had been recreating the cover art from True Detective magazines from the 1930s. If you've never seen these magazines, they used to have cover art depicting a scantily clad female being threatened with imminent death. The police were called to the scene to investigate, but it's uncertain whether the photos vanished before they arrived or the police collected them and then the photos were lost. No official case was ever opened. The weird sightings don't happen along the parts of Shades of Death where the houses are. It's either no one moves in where the ghosts are seen, or the ghosts stay away from the houses. If nothing else, it would make for a cool address. Where do you live? Oh, I live on Shades of Death Road. Back in 2000, there was a TV show I liked to watch. I think this was the first time a show used those camera backpacks that show the face of the folks doing their investigations. Since then, these cameras have shown up in so many shows I find them a bit annoying. The show was called The Scariest Places on Earth. Linda Blair was the host, and Zelda Rubinstein was the narrator. She had a very creepy-sounding voice. Families would be invited to spend the night investigating some haunted location, and there was always a lot of screaming and running around. I liked seeing the locations, but I could have done without all that screaming and running. August 19th, 2001, The Island of No Return was aired. The place they visited was Poveglia Island off the coast of Venice, which has to be a very creepy and haunted location. The island was first mentioned in the chronicles in 421, when people from Padua Este fled a barbarian invasion. They stayed on the island until the barbarians had finished and left. Well, nobody wanted to stay on the island, so everybody moved back to their homes, leaving the island uninhabited. Sometime in the 9th century, the island was inhabited on a regular basis. Eventually, the folks living on the island had to be evacuated when Venice was attacked by Genoa. The entire population of Poveglia was moved to Giudecca. Oh, these Italian names. Giudecca? Well, the island remained uninhabited up until 1527, when the island was offered to the Camaldolisia monks as a home for their order. I can pronounce Capuchin monks, but not Camaldolisia. Cappuccino? Cappuccino's a monkey. Well, the monks passed on the offer. The island was too remote and inhospitable even for the monks. Now, considering the places that monks tend to live, you gotta wonder just how bad was this island that they said, no thank you. We'd much rather stay in a cave on the side of a mountain than that island. In 1645, the Venetian government built 5 octagonal forts to protect and control the entrance to the lagoon. The military will use locations nobody else wants. In 1776, the island was passed on to the Public Health Office to be used for quarantining ships coming to Venice. A quarantine, or 40 giorni, which means 40 days in Italian, was a period of detention or isolation imposed upon ships wishing to enter port. This was to prevent the spread of infectious or contagious diseases. In 1793, the 2 men were found to be carrying Black Death, and the island became more of a prison for anybody with the plague. Even with the quarantine in place, plague managed to sneak into Venice. Anyone suspected of having this disease was forcefully removed from their homes and taken out to the island, where they were abandoned. With thousands of people now trapped on the island and very little medical treatment, bodies began to pile up. This was added to by all the dead from Venice being transported to the island for disposal as well. Huge pits would be dug and the bodies dumped into the bottom. The bodies would be set afire and burned, and then the pit would be covered with dirt. When one pit would be filled, a new one would be dug. There was no record kept of who was thrown into these pits and burned, or where the pits were built. Thousands of bodies wound up being buried together in unmarked graves all over the island. The idea of burning bodies to prevent the plague actually worked in the opposite direction. See, the bodies weren't the problem. The fleas on the bodies that were carrying the plague, that was the problem. Well, when the bodies were being piled up and burned, the fleas would leave the dead host looking for a new home. Usually one of the guys doing the body disposal. The men doing the burning would then row their boats back to Venice, and the fleas would get a chance to bite more people. A church had been built on the island. Napoleon Bonaparte continued putting sick people on the island. I'm not sure why, but he had the church torn down. Only the steeple was left in place to be used as a lighthouse. Once the plague had run its course, The island sat uninhabited until 1922, when the Italian government converted the existing buildings into a hospital for long-term care, as well as an asylum for the mentally ill. And on that pleasant note, I am going to take a brief pause to play some commercials and drink some coffee. Don't go away, I'll be right back after these exciting and important messages. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Makeup isn't something you want to just smear on and hope for the best. You might come out looking like Lon Chaney. Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and get a free makeover to see how makeup should be done. 956-723-3019. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Trike. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. I keep threatening to record some new commercials. I know I'm getting tired of listening to those, and sure y'all are too, but they're my friends. I got to take care of them. I get all that free coffee at the coffee trike. I get glasses from my brother-in-law every couple of years. And of course, I got to support my wife. Someday I will do some new commercials, though. Well, back to the island. Some of the patients being treated on the island said they were seeing things. They would babble about seeing people around them that nobody else could see. Maybe what they were seeing was actually the spirits of those burned and buried under their feet. I have dealt with folks who were having dementia episodes. They would talk about seeing someone, either standing by their bed or in the corner or maybe even looking in through the window. I wonder how many of the long-term patients who are supposed to be having hallucinations might have actually been seeing something, a ghost or a spirit. By 1968, the hospital was closed and the land was used by the Department of Agriculture. They built a lot of little sheds all over the island for various agricultural experiments and for things they needed to grow plants. This only lasted a few years before the island was once more abandoned. In 2014, the Italian state auctioned a 99-year lease of Poveglia Island, which would remain state property, but you could build what you wanted there and use the island for 99 years. They did this to raise revenue, hoping that the buyer would redevelop the hospital into a luxury hotel. Sounds good, doesn't it? Hey, let's go to the hospital for a vacation. Well, the highest bid was from an Italian businessman, Luigi Bugnaro, but the lease did not proceed as his project was judged not to meet all of their conditions. He either wanted to tear something down or build something else, and the state of Italy wanted the island to remain pretty much the way it was, which makes absolutely no sense since the hospital is practically falling down as it is. Huge sections of stairs are missing because they've collapsed, even though they're made out of concrete. Well, the show, Scariest Places, was a Hollywood creation. Hollywood has an idea on what people want to see, whether this is actually what we want to see or not. It's called the Hollywood formula. It's kind of like I like watching Finding Bigfoot. This was as close to being reality as you could get from a TV screen. The folks from Hollywood tried to beef up the action by telling the guests, or the hosts, I should say, telling the hosts, act like you heard a Bigfoot growl, or act as if you see something in the woods. Well, the four hosts said, no, that's not how we do this. If it's not there, we're not going to pretend like it is. They nearly came to blows over this. It got to a point where the top Hollywood executive had to go to the scene, talk to both sides about what was going on, and finally he told the production crew, just film and tape what they're doing. Don't try to make any more suggestions. According to some members of the team, Finding Bigfoot was about as close to actual real live TV as you're ever going to see. Unfortunately, the show is no longer with us. Maybe someday they'll bring it back. If you go to the Bigfoot conventions scattered throughout the world, the country, sometimes you will run into some of the former members of the Finding Bigfoot crew. In Scariest Places, all the action was enhanced to make it more appealing. I would have preferred just showing what the cast was doing, but that's me. Maybe a lot of people like the drama and suspense. Trust me, most ghost hunts aren't all that exciting. You walk around in the dark with your camera, with your recorder. You look for something, you listen for something. You try not to get lost in the dark. Then you go home, and you sit down at a computer and you review hours and hours of video, and you listen to hours and hours of audio, hoping there will be something there. Now, when you do see something, that's when it gets a little more exciting, a little more interesting. But most ghost hunts are about as exciting as watching the grass grow. If you're thinking of becoming a ghost investigator, you might want to go hang out with a couple of ghost teams before you start investing a lot of hard-earned money into something you might find you're just not into. The ghost investigators that have visited Poveglia Island always come away with the same sort of things. The first item most of them say is as soon as they got onto the island, they felt as if they were being watched. No matter where on the island they went, the feeling of being watched was a constant thing. If you had to go to the bathroom, the people found it irritating, annoying, and somewhat scary because there were no bathrooms available, so you just had to go wherever you could find. And do you want to be watched while you're doing your thing? A lot of people were scratched by unseen entities. Some felt themselves being pushed as they walked along the paths on the island or while they were inside the buildings. Everyone left with a feeling of having experienced some kind of otherworldly activity. A little closer to home here. Rikers Island is in New York, in the East River between the Bronx and Queens. It is New York City's jail complex. The place has outlived its ability to function, but the city isn't likely to build a new jail anytime soon. The inmates have a special job they get to do in order to get plenty of fresh air and sunshine, along with some exercise. The job involves being shuttled over to Hart Island, where they get to dig graves. Hart Island is also known as the Island of the Dead, and it is run by the New York State Department of Corrections, and unless you're a convict or a guard, you're not allowed to set foot on the island. Not even the press is allowed access except for on a very few guided tours that were granted over the years, and only on very special occasions. Family members of those buried in the cemetery are only allowed supervised visits. There's a small gazebo near the dock used for visiting the island. This is as close as they will get to the gravesite of their departed relatives. If you were to get cocky and try to sneak onto the island, you can be punished by as much as 2 years in jail. Well, then you can get a job digging graves and you can visit the island. Burials on Hart Island began during the American Civil War, when it was being used as a POW camp. For 4 months in 1865, 3,413 captured Confederate soldiers were housed on the island. Of these, 235 soldiers died in the camp, and they were buried on the island. After the Civil War, the island served as a quarantine station when yellow fever hit New York in 1870. A woman's insane asylum was built in 1885. Just the place to be while you're trying to get your mindset right. The building is still there, but it's been abandoned for years now, and trees are growing up through the roof. For a while, the island was used to house delinquent boys from 1920 until the beginning of World War II, when it was turned over to the Navy to be used as a disciplinarian barracks for Navy, Coast Guard, and Marine personnel. As many as 2,800 servicemen were in custody on the island at various times. The Department of Corrections used the island for a prison for a few years. Then it was turned over to tuberculosis patients. They were kept on the island to keep them away from the rest of the populace. They also tried using the island as a drug rehabilitation site for a while. The Island of the Dead, as it is often called, has been used primarily over the years as a dumping ground for those not lucky enough to have a proper burial. Over 850,000 people have been buried in mass graves on this tiny island, and the burials haven't stopped yet. The vast majority of people buried there die alone, abandoned or unclaimed by relatives or friends. Some of these were homeless people who were found laying dead in the streets or alleyways, picked up by the authorities and sent to the island to be done with them once and for all. Some of these folks would be unidentified, and nobody knows who they were or if they have families still out looking for them. There were the mentally ill, alcoholic or drug users who slipped into a coma or died, not knowing they'd even passed on. There are those also who were just too poor to be buried anywhere else. The relatives find themselves with a dead body and no way to bury it. Throwing themselves on the mercy of the state, their deceased relatives are whisked away to be warehoused along with all the other human wreckage from that week. The last thing for these folks is to be dumped into a trench by inmates, along with all the other unclaimed bodies. Well, that was loud. There were a lot of children buried on the island. Many of them were runaways or orphans. No ceremonies are performed, no eulogies spoken. Just a wooden box lifted from the boat by the prisoners, carried to the ditch, stacked up, and then covered with dirt. Now, I can't say for sure the island is haunted. I can only speculate. No one is allowed to go on the island to see if the place is haunted. The prisoners that work there are only there in the daytime, and they're not allowed to talk to the press or to ghost hunters. Seeing as there are so many dead buried on the island, I don't see how it could not be a place of spirits roaming about looking for whatever it is they need to accomplish before moving on. No ghost hunting group is allowed to set foot on Hart Island. Maybe someday the folks on Rikers Island will form their own ghost investigation team and they'll let us know. Or maybe some devious ghost hunting crew just might fly a drone over the island equipped with infrared cameras and EMF detectors. I wonder what the law says about flying a drone over an island you're not allowed to set foot on. Hint, hint. I'm waiting for somebody in New York to say, hey, that sounds like a good idea. If you do, let me know what you find. High school can be a challenge to a lot of kids. When I went, we had 7th grade through 12th. 12-year-olds mixed in with 18-year-olds. Our school had a basement that was also a fallout shelter. In the corners under the stairs were fenced-in areas filled with civil defense boxes and barrels. The idea was, if the Soviet Union dropped a bunch of nuclear bombs on the United States, we'd all survive the next few years down in the basement. Could you imagine trying this with a bunch of high school kids? Even today, I hear from school teachers and students from all over the country who tell me about weird things they've seen and heard while in school. In El Paso, there is the high school with some interesting problems. The place was built in 1916, and the building is still being used today, but I understand it needs some renovations. Right next to the front door is a display case filled with trophies and photos from the past. One photo shows a group of students and staff from 1985. It looks like any high school photo. However, there's one girl that stands out for several reasons. No one from the class of 1985 knows who she was. Her face is blurry, as if she moved when the photo was being taken, but that isn't what happened because she's not on the negative. When a photo was taken, you had to use film to take the picture, and then it had to be developed. I keep thinking I don't have to mention this. Then I hear from listeners who don't know what these things are, so here it is. The negative is what you have once the film is developed. Everything white is black and everything black is white. Thus the name negative. When you put the negative into an enlarger, the image is transferred to photo paper where the negative becomes the photograph. The girl in white is not on the negative, but she appeared on the photograph when it was developed. Her style of dress doesn't match any of the other people in the photo. The basement of the old school had been used in 1918 during an emergency of biblical proportions. The Spanish flu was raging through the globe and thousands of people were dying. So many, the government had to use whatever place was available as temporary morgue. One of these morgues was the basement of the high school. Could the girl in white have been one of the bodies stored in the basement of the school at one time? 1922, a teenage girl discovered her one true love wasn't that much in love with her. She committed suicide by slitting her wrists and then jumping from either a balcony or the roof. People would report seeing a girl falling or jumping from the spot where she had jumped from, only to find there was nobody there. The area where she jumped from had so many sightings that the school had the area blocked off to keep students from lingering there looking for her ghosts. Maybe she's the girl in white. A set of doors in the gym crashed open one day while the basketball team was practicing. The doors kept swinging back and forth, so the coach had a few of the kids push a bench over to hold the doors in place. A little while later, the doors crashed back shut. The bench had been moved to allow the doors to close, but nobody had moved them. Not wanting to deal with anything bizarre, the coach sent everyone home, and he left right away himself. Late one evening, the track team was returning from an away meet. They'd been in Austin competing, and they got back well after dark. As the students were grabbing their gear to head home, the coach thought he could hear chanting coming from the auditorium. It sounded like a pep rally was going on. Thinking that the school was having some kind of a welcome home gathering for the track team, he went to have a look. Opening the door to the auditorium, he was greeted by nothing. It was dark and quiet inside the enormous room. There was no one there, and he couldn't hear anything. So he went back to where the team was, getting ready to depart. Then all of the team could hear chanting and cheering coming from the auditorium. The coach was beginning to worry about what was going on. The group went to the auditorium and opened the door. Once more, there was no one there, and the room was dark. Someone found the light switches and turned them on. The auditorium was empty of everyone except for the team. This was just too weird, so they turned the lights off and got out of the building before anything else happened. It snows in El Paso. I spent the night in a FEMA trailer with no heat, and it gets really cold. And I don't like the cold. 1990 or thereabouts, it snowed a lot in El Paso. The officials decided it was too bad for travel, so they announced school was closed for the day. Well, several teachers and some of the students had already arrived, and then they found it was too nasty out in order to get back home. They decided to stay and make the best of it. With nothing to do to while away the time, they began roaming around the building, looking at all the things that they didn't get to look at during class. In the basement, there are tunnels that run in several directions. Some lead to underground facilities like heating or sewage disposal. One of these tunnels had been bricked shut. The bricks were old and the mortar was falling away, so somebody kind of gave the wall a little push, and the brick barrier fell away, giving access to what looked like 2 classrooms. To begin with, why would there be 2 classrooms at the end of a tunnel? Then, why were they bricked up? The explorers got a flashlight, and they looked through the opening. The room was set up as if it was ready for class. It was set up with desks and chairs from decades ago. There was a thick layer of dust on everything. The floor was thick with dirt. In the trash can, they found Baby Ruth candy bar wrappers and Coke bottles that were all from the early 1920s. The textbooks were all from years ago. I was never big on high school spirit. I avoided pep rallies unless I was forced to go. I didn't wear the school colors, and I can't even remember what they were. Never went to any games or any extra school activities. I never made it into the yearbook. At El Paso High School, the kids were working on putting the yearbook together. They stayed late into the evening to sort photographs and come up with catchy sayings to put on the pages. Now I remember why I stayed out of the yearbook. Anyway, the teacher in charge was about to exit the building when he saw a girl standing by the exit. She was lit by the red glow from the emergency exit sign. She was dressed as if she was about to attend the prom. The prom from 1940. Thinking she might have come by to add something to the book, he asked her if he could help her. He had already been walking towards the door, so as he went, he could see her more clearly with each step. Her outfit looked way out of place. She looked sad, as if some tragedy had just happened. At any moment, she should burst into tears. That's when he noticed she wasn't actually standing on the floor. Her legs didn't extend past her knees. The teacher was shocked, and he stopped walking to look at the girl from another time. As he looked, the girl slowly faded away. She was gone in less than a minute. The school has been remodeled and repaired many times over the 100 years. As construction was being done in the auditorium, the workers began to tear the steps out that led up to the stage. Inside the first step, they found several volumes from a Catholic encyclopedia. The next step yielded even more of these books. As each step was opened, more books were found, until an entire set of encyclopedias was at hand. These were very rare and valuable. The big question was, why were they hidden away inside the steps, and by whom? The set did not originate at the school as far as anyone could figure out. There was nothing in any records saying where these books came from, and none of them had any marks showing who had owned them. Too many unanswered questions. Then again, what would life be like without any mysteries to contemplate? I keep saying, I hope Rick and Marty Lagina find a treasure at the bottom of Oak Island that will make all of that effort worth doing. But at the same time, I don't really want to know. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Tell your friends. Heck, tell people you don't know. Spread the word. Strange things can always use the audience. Till next Saturday.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?